She walked in asking for a spa pass. 7 minutes later, the CEO, everyone ignored, fired the entire staff. Welcome to Tales by Orion. Let's uncover what really happened. The first whisper of dawn was painting the sophisticated skyline of Montclair City in hues of soft rose and pale gold as Imani Adebayo's unassuming electric rental car hummed quietly to a stop across the street from the Azure Palace. This was the newest jewel in the crown of Serenescape's hospitality. The boutique luxury hotel chain she had inherited and then meticulously expanded, transforming her grandfather's vision of inclusive, soulful luxury into a global benchmark. At 38, Imani possessed a quiet intensity that often belied the formidable intellect and strategic acumen that had made Serenescapes a quiet powerhouse in a world of ostentatious giants. Today, she was dressed not in the bespoke power suits that graced her appearances in financial journals, but in comfortable, well-worn travel slacks, a simple linen blouse, and practical walking shoes. Her naturally curly hair was pulled back in a simple, unadorned clasp, and her only accessory was a vintage leather satchel that had belonged to her grandfather, its surface softened with age and rich with unspoken history. This was an unannounced visit, an incognito immersion. It was a practice her grandfather had instilled. To truly understand the heart of a hotel, one had to experience it not as its owner, but as its most unassuming guest. He believed that true hospitality revealed itself in the small, unobserved moments, in the way every guest, regardless of perceived status, was treated. The Azure Palace, under the much-lauded general management of a Mr. Alastair Finch, a man poached from a rival old-world luxury brand, known for his impeccable tailoring and his even more impeccable snobbery, had been receiving rave reviews in certain glossy magazines, praised for its exclusive atmosphere and discerning clientele. Yet, Imani had also noted a subtle but persistent undercurrent in unfiltered online reviews, quiet complaints of dismissiveness, of a certain coldness experienced by guests who didn't fit a particular, very narrow mold. These were the whispers she had come to investigate. She watched for a few moments as the hotel slowly came to life. Liveried doormen, polished to a high sheen, greeted arriving guests, those emerging from sleek black town cars, with effusive, almost subservient courtesy. A different, more perfunctory nod was reserved for those arriving by standard taxi. It was a small detail, but Imani's mind, trained to discern patterns in complex data sets, registered it. This wasn't just a hotel. It was a carefully curated ecosystem of perceived status, and Alastair Finch was its self-appointed zookeeper. She thought of her grandfather, a man whose own journey had begun in a small, segregated village, who had built his empire on the radical notion that luxury should be a refuge for the soul, open to all who appreciated beauty and kindness, not a fortress for the privileged few. He used to say, "Imani, the soul of a hotel is not in its marble floors or its crystal chandeliers, but in the genuine warmth of its welcome. If that warmth is selective, then it is not warmth at all. It is merely a performance." As she crossed the street, the morning sun now glinting off the hotel's soaring glass facade, Imani felt a familiar tightening in her chest, a premonition that the soul of the Azure Palace might be in need of urgent resuscitation. She wondered, as she often did when embarking on these incognito assessments, how many of you watching this, perhaps from a bustling city in South Africa, a quiet town in Canada, or a vibrant metropolis in Brazil, have encountered that subtle, chilling shift in service, that almost imperceptible act of judgment based on nothing more than your appearance, your accent, or the perceived weight of your wallet. It's a universal sting, that moment of being made to feel other. Imani had felt it before, in other establishments, in other contexts. But this was her hotel, and the standards here were supposed to be different. They were supposed to be hers. Imani pushed open the heavy, ornate glass doors of the Azure Palace and stepped into a lobby that was a symphony of hushed opulence. Marble floors gleamed under a colossal crystal chandelier. Plush velvet seating areas were artfully arranged around modern sculptures, and the air was subtly scented with a custom fragrance that probably cost more per ounce than her entire outfit. It was undeniably beautiful, impeccably designed, yet it felt cold. There was a performative perfection to it, like a museum exhibit rather than a welcoming space. She approached the long, polished reception desk, where two clerks, a young man and a young woman, both immaculately groomed and wearing expressions of serene, almost bored, superiority, were attending to a guest dripping in designer labels. Imani waited patiently, observing. The interaction with the designer-clad guest was a masterpiece of fawning deference. Smiles were wide, voices were hushed and conspiratorial. Every request met with an eager, "Absolutely, madam," right away. When that guest finally glided away, leaving a trail of expensive perfume, the smiles on the clerks' faces vanished as if switched off. The young woman, whose name tag read Tiffany, turned to Imani, her expression transforming into one of polite, but distinctly cooler, inquiry. Her eyes did a swift, almost imperceptible, up-and-down scan of Imani's attire. "Yes?" Tiffany asked, her tone implying that Imani was likely in the wrong place. "Good morning," Imani said, her voice quiet but clear. "I was hoping to inquire about the availability of a day pass for your rooftop pool and spa facilities. I'm in town for a brief visit and heard they were quite exceptional." Tiffany's perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched a fraction. "A day pass, madam? The Azure Palace facilities are primarily for the exclusive use of our registered guests." The emphasis on exclusive was not subtle. "I understand that," Imani replied calmly. "However, your website mentions that limited day passes are sometimes available, subject to occupancy." Tiffany exchanged a fleeting, almost imperceptible glance with her male colleague, Chad. It was a look that spoke volumes, a silent communication of shared judgment. "That is occasionally the case, madam," Tiffany said, her voice now carrying a distinct note of condescension. "However, today, we are expecting a very discerning clientele. Our facilities are likely to be at full capacity with our esteemed guests." She didn't bother to check any system, to make any actual inquiry. The dismissal was preemptive, based entirely on her assessment of Imani. "I see," Imani said, her internal composure unwavering, though she noted the microaggressions with the precision of a seismograph detecting distant tremors. "Perhaps you could check? I wouldn't want to rely on likelihoods." Tiffany's smile became a thin, brittle line. "Madam, I can assure you, it is highly improbable. The Azure Palace caters to a certain standard. Our day pass rates, when available, are also quite significant." The implication was clear. You probably can't afford it, and even if you could, you don't belong. Just then, a flurry of activity near the main entrance heralded the arrival of Mr. Alistair Finch himself. He swept into the lobby, his silver hair gleaming, his bespoke suit a testament to Savile Row, his gaze already scanning for imperfections, for anything that might mar the carefully constructed illusion of flawless luxury he presided over. His eyes fell upon Imani, standing at the reception desk in her simple clothes, and his perfectly composed face tightened in an almost imperceptible frown. He glided over, his movements exuding an aura of barely contained irritation. "Tiffany, Chad, is there a problem here?" Finch asked, his voice a low, cultured growl that nevertheless managed to convey instant displeasure. He didn't look at Imani directly, as if she were a piece of misplaced luggage. Tiffany immediately straightened, her professional smile snapping back into place, now tinged with a sycophantic eagerness to please. "No problem at all, Mr. Finch. This lady was just inquiring about spa access. I was explaining our exclusivity policy." Finch finally deigned to look at Imani, his gaze sweeping over her with an expression of profound distaste, the kind one might reserve for an insect discovered on a pristine white tablecloth. "Indeed," he said, his voice dripping with icy disdain. "The Azure Palace prides itself on maintaining the highest standards, not just of service, but of ambience. We cultivate an environment for a particular caliber of guest. Perhaps, madam," he finally addressed her, his tone making it clear he considered her anything but one of the city's public facilities might be more suitable for your needs. The insult, delivered with such polished cruelty, hung in the air. Chad snickered behind his hand. Tiffany looked down, a faint smirk playing on her lips. Imani felt a cold knot form in her stomach, not of fear, but of a deep, profound disappointment. This was worse than she had imagined. This wasn't just poor training. This was a culture of deliberate, ingrained exclusion, sanctioned, indeed, championed from the very top. I believe I understand your standards perfectly, Mr. Finch, Imani said, her voice quiet. But her eyes, if he had bothered to truly meet them, held a glint of something far removed from submission. She turned, without another word, and walked towards the exit, the weight of their collective scorn following her like a physical force. As she stepped back out into the bright Montclair city morning, the beautiful facade of the Azure Palace seemed to mock her. Her grandfather's words echoed in her mind. If that warmth is selective, then it is not warmth at all. It is merely a performance. And the performance at the Azure Palace, Imani now knew, was a toxic charade. The sting of Finch's public dismissal, the casual cruelty in his eyes, didn't ignite a fiery rage in Imani. Instead, it settled into a cold, hard resolve, the kind that had seen her navigate treacherous global markets and dismantle entrenched corporate oligarchies. This wasn't just about a rude manager and a few snobbish clerks. This was about a systemic rot that was poisoning the very essence of what Serenescape's hospitality was supposed to represent. Her grandfather had built his company on the bedrock of genuine human connection, believing that true luxury was found not in exclusivity, but in the generosity of spirit, in making every individual feel seen, valued, and respected. What she had just witnessed at the Azure Palace was a grotesque perversion of that founding principle. Instead of leaving the vicinity, Imani found a small, discreet artisanal coffee shop directly across the wide avenue, its outdoor seating offering a clear, unobstructed view of the Azure Palace's grand entrance. She ordered a black coffee, her mind already shifting from the mode of incognito guest to that of CEO and forensic analyst. She pulled out a small, encrypted tablet from her grandfather's satchel, a device that looked deceptively simple but contained secure communication links and analytical tools that would make most corporate IT departments weep with envy. As she sipped her coffee, her eyes scanned the comings and goings at the hotel. She noted the subtle hierarchies, the practiced deference of the staff towards guests who arrived in high-end vehicles or bore the unmistakable insignia of wealth, and the almost invisible, yet palpable, shift in their demeanor when dealing with those who appeared less affluent or more diverse. It was a masterclass in coded bias, a silent language of exclusion that was clearly understood and practiced by Finch's entire team. While observing, she initiated a series of discreet, encrypted communications. Her first message was to Alara Vance, her longtime executive assistant and chief of staff, a woman whose efficiency and loyalty were legendary within Serenescapes. Alara, situation critical at Azure Palace. Initiate code Obsidian. Full operational and personnel audit. Prioritize guest feedback log for the past 6 months. Cross-reference with diversity metrics of complainants. I need a preliminary report within 3 hours. Discretion absolute. Code Obsidian was a rarely used protocol, reserved for situations requiring swift, decisive intervention at a failing property, usually involving suspected gross mismanagement or ethical breaches. Her next communication was to Marcus Thorne, no relation to the earlier story's antagonist. This was a trusted internal auditor, head of Serenescape's Internal Audit and Compliance Division, a man with a reputation for unearthing corporate malfeasance with the tenacity of a bloodhound. Marcus, I need a deep dive into the Azure Palace's financials, specifically looking for anomalies in procurement, vendor contracts related to ambience enhancement, and any discretionary funds controlled by GM Alastair Finch. Cross-reference with any complaints or red flags raised by the previous internal audit team, the one Finch had. Restructured last quarter. She remembered the quiet concern raised by that previous team before Finch had them reassigned. concerns he had dismissed as unfounded pessimism from individuals who don't understand the unique demands of the ultra-luxury market. Imani had a feeling those unfounded concerns were about to become very well-founded indeed. She then spent some time reviewing the publicly available and not so publicly available online commentary regarding the Azure Palace. Beyond the glossy, paid-for influencer posts and the carefully curated 5-star reviews on preferred platforms, she delved into the more obscure travel forums, the niche review sites, the unfiltered corners of the internet where guests shared their unvarnished experiences. The pattern was disturbingly consistent. Guests who fit Finch's preferred demographic, wealthy, white, often older, raved about the impeccable service and exclusive atmosphere. But guests from diverse ethnic backgrounds, younger travelers who favored understated style over ostentatious branding, or even just those who didn't arrive with an entourage, frequently reported experiences ranging from subtle coolness and dismissiveness to outright rudeness and a palpable sense of not belonging. One review, from a highly respected black female entrepreneur who had attempted to host a small business reception at the hotel, was particularly damning. She recounted being treated with such condescension by Mr. Finch himself, who had questioned her ability to afford the event space and implied her guests wouldn't fit the hotel's image, that she had taken her considerable business elsewhere, to a rival hotel that had welcomed her with open arms. Imani's jaw tightened as she read it. This wasn't just poor service. This was active discrimination, a cancer that Finch was not just tolerating, but cultivating. This was a direct violation of Serenescape's core charter, a document her grandfather had penned himself, which explicitly stated, "Hospitality knows no color, no creed, no artificial distinction. Our doors are open to all who seek comfort, beauty, and the warmth of a genuine welcome. To offer less is to fail not just our guests, but ourselves." Alastair Finch, it was becoming abundantly clear, had failed on an epic scale. The 7 minutes of the title wasn't just a random number. It was beginning to feel like a countdown to a necessary and increasingly imminent detonation. The preliminary reports from Alara Vance and Marcus Thorne began to filter into Imani's encrypted tablet within the promised 3-hour window, painting a picture even more damning than she had anticipated. Alara Vance's audit of guest feedback logs was a litany of coded complaints and overt accusations of discriminatory treatment. Phrases like felt unwelcome, staff were dismissive, treated differently than other guests, and manager was arrogant and unhelpful appeared with alarming frequency, disproportionately linked to guests from minority backgrounds or those perceived as less affluent. The diversity metrics of these complainants were stark. Over 70% of negative feedback related to staff attitude came from guests who identified as non-white or who were traveling without the obvious trappings of extreme wealth. Furthermore, Vance had uncovered a disturbing pattern. Negative reviews on certain high-profile platforms seemed to be systematically suppressed or managed by an external reputation management firm hired by Finch at considerable expense, a firm with a dubious track record and even more dubious ethics. Marcus Thorne's financial deep dive was equally alarming. He flagged numerous irregularities in the Azure Palace's procurement records. Finch had apparently established exclusive, highly inflated contracts with a small circle of preferred vendors for everything from floral arrangements, exotic, wilting blooms at twice the market rate, to staff uniforms custom designed by a couturier who turned out to be Finch's unemployed nephew, to the lobby's custom scent, an olfactory branding experience, costing tens of thousands a month from a company with no other discernible clients. There was also a significant discretionary marketing and ambience fund controlled directly by Finch with minimal oversight and even less transparent accounting. Large sums have been spent on VIP influencer hosting for individuals whose online reach was questionable, but whose flattery of Finch was apparently boundless. More disturbingly, Thorne had found evidence that Finch had actively discouraged group bookings or events from organizations that he deemed off-brand, effectively turning away significant revenue from minority business associations, cultural festivals, and even well-regarded philanthropic galas that didn't align with his narrow vision of exclusive luxury. The restructured internal audit team, the one Finch had dismantled, had indeed raised red flags about these very issues, only to have their concerns dismissed and their careers at Serenescapes effectively sidelined. It was a clear pattern of mismanagement, potential fraud, and a deeply ingrained discriminatory culture, all orchestrated or tacitly approved by Alistair Finch. Imani felt a cold fury settle within her. This wasn't just incompetence. This was a deliberate betrayal of her grandfather's legacy, a cynical perversion of the very principle Serenescapes was built upon. He was running the Azure Palace not as a welcoming haven, but as his own private fiefdom, a monument to his ego and his prejudices, all on her company's dime and at the expense of its reputation. She decided to conduct one final personal test. Still incognito, she called the Azure Palace's main reservation line from a disposable burner phone number she acquired. Using a slightly altered accent, one that might be perceived by the prejudiced as less sophisticated, she inquired about booking a suite for a weekend, mentioning she was celebrating a special anniversary and was looking for a truly memorable experience. The reservation agent, after a series of subtly probing questions about her travel profile and preferred amenities, questions not typically asked to callers with more mainstream accents, as Imani knew from her company's standard call scripts, regretfully informed her that all suites were fully committed for the foreseeable future. A blatant lie, as Imani's own internal booking system, which she accessed discreetly on her tablet, showed at least 3 premium suites available for the requested dates. Moments later, she had Alara Vance call the same reservation line, using her crisp, unaccented executive English, inquiring about the exact same suites for the exact same dates, mentioning she was booking for a valued corporate client. Miraculously, a luxurious signature view suite had just become available due to a last-minute cancellation. The difference in tone, in deference, in outcome was stark and undeniable. This wasn't just about a rude clerk or an arrogant manager. This was systemic, ingrained, and utterly unacceptable. Imani closed her tablet, her decision made. The time for quiet observation was over. The time for decisive action had arrived. She looked across the street at the Azure Palace, its gleaming facade now looking less like a beacon of luxury and more like a whited sepulchre, beautiful on the outside, but filled with the decay of prejudice and mismanagement within. Her grandfather had always said, "When you find a rot, Imani, you don't just paint over it. You cut it out clean, swift, and complete before it poisons the whole structure." The structure of Serenescapes was sound, but the Azure Palace, under Alistair Finch, was a festering wound. And Imani Adebayo was the surgeon, scalpel in hand, ready to make the necessary incision. The 7 minutes were about to begin. She sent one final, encrypted message to Alara Vance and Marcus Thorne. Phase 2. Converge Azure Palace. ETA 1700 hours. Full executive override protocols active. Prepare for immediate and comprehensive personnel and operational restructuring. No compromises. The late afternoon sun cast long, dramatic shadows across Montclair City as Imani Adebayo, no longer the unassuming traveler, but the embodiment of focused, decisive leadership, prepared to re-enter the Azure Palace. Her team was en route. Alara Vance, her ever-efficient chief of staff, would be arriving with Marcus Thorne, head of internal audit, and a compact, highly experienced legal and HR crisis team from Serenescape's corporate headquarters. They were a well-oiled machine, veterans of complex international acquisitions and sensitive internal restructurings, loyal to Imani and to the core principles of the company. Imani herself took a few moments in the quiet solitude of her rented car to center herself. She wasn't driven by anger, though the morning's humiliation and the subsequent revelations of Finch's malfeasance had certainly stirred righteous indignation. Her primary motivation was a profound sense of responsibility to her grandfather's legacy, to her company's values, to the vast majority of Serenescape's employees worldwide who worked diligently and ethically, and to the guests who deserved to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their background or appearance. She thought of the 7 minutes not as a duration of revenge, but as a symbolic window of swift, surgical intervention. The rot at the Azure Palace was deep, excising it would require a level of decisiveness that might seem brutal to outsiders, but was, in her experienced judgment, absolutely necessary to save the property and, more importantly, to send an unequivocal message throughout the entire Serenescapes organization that such behavior would not be tolerated, ever. She changed out of her travel clothes, donning a sharply tailored but understated navy blue pantsuit she had in her satchel, a garment that spoke of quiet power rather than ostentatious wealth. She reclassed her hair, her movements precise and deliberate. Her only adornment was a simple, elegant timepiece, a gift from her grandfather, its steady ticking a reminder of the relentless march of consequence. As the clock on her dashboard neared 1700 hours, 5 p.m., she saw the discreet black town cars carrying her team pull up a block away from the hotel, their occupants emerging and beginning a coordinated, almost invisible approach towards the Azure Palace from different directions. Marcus Thorne and the legal team would secure Finch's office and all relevant financial and operational records. Alara Vance and the HR specialists would prepare for the immediate processing of terminations and the implementation of interim management protocols. It was a perfectly choreographed maneuver, designed for maximum efficiency and minimal disruption to any genuinely well-intentioned guests who might be in the hotel. Imani herself would be the point of the spear. At precisely 4:53 p.m., 7 minutes before her team was scheduled to make their presence known internally, Imani Adebayo took a deep breath, stepped out of her car, and began her final walk towards the grand entrance of the Azure Palace. This time, she wasn't an incognito guest hoping for a spa pass. She was the owner, the CEO, the ultimate authority, and she was about to reclaim her house. The same doorman who had barely acknowledged her that morning now stiffened slightly as she approached, a flicker of uneasy recognition in their eyes. Perhaps it was the change in her attire or the undeniable aura of command that now emanated from her, but they sensed something was different. She didn't pause, didn't offer a greeting. She simply walked past them, her stride purposeful, her gaze fixed on the reception desk where Tiffany and Chad were once again on duty, looking bored and superior as they dealt with a guest checking out. The performance of their earlier encounter was about to have its unexpected, and for them, devastating, encore. The air in the lobby, usually so cool and controlled, suddenly felt charged, expectant, as if the building itself was holding its breath. The 7 minutes had begun. Imani Adebayo walked across the gleaming marble lobby of the Azure Palace, her sensible heels making a soft, deliberate clicking sound that seemed to cut through the hushed ambience like a metronome counting down to a reckoning. Tiffany and Chad, still presiding over the reception desk with their customary air of bored disdain, looked up as she approached. A flicker of annoyance crossed Tiffany's perfectly made-up face. This persistent, inappropriately dressed woman again? Chad smirked, clearly anticipating another opportunity to witness, and perhaps participate in, her dismissal. "I believe we made it clear this morning, madam," Tiffany began, her voice already taking on the patronizing tone Imani remembered so vividly, that the Azure Palace is not. Imani didn't let her finish. She placed her simple leather satchel firmly on the polished marble countertop, a gesture that, while quiet, somehow commanded instant attention. "Actually, Tiffany," Imani said, her voice calm, devoid of any anger, yet carrying an undeniable weight of authority that made both clerks blink. What was made clear this morning was the deplorable level of service and the deeply ingrained discriminatory attitude prevalent at this establishment. An attitude that, I can assure you, is about to undergo a swift and comprehensive correction. Tiffany and Chad exchanged a startled, uneasy glance. This was not the timid, easily dismissed woman from that morning. There was a new, steely quality in her eyes, a quiet power in her stance that was deeply unsettling. I beg your pardon," Tiffany stammered, her professional composure beginning to crack. "Who do you think you are, barging in here and making such accusations?" Just then, Alastair Finch, alerted by a panicked whisper from a passing bellhop who had recognized Imani and sensed trouble, strode out from his office corridor, his face a mask of thunderous indignation. "What in blazes is going on here?" he boomed, his voice echoing across the lobby. "You again? I thought I had you removed from my hotel this morning. This is outrageous. Security. Security. Remove this trespasser immediately." Two uniformed security guards, who had been lurking discreetly near the entrance, began to advance, their expressions stern. Imani didn't even glance at them. Her gaze remained fixed on Finch, a look of almost clinical assessment in her eyes. "Your hotel, Mr. Finch?" Imani said, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. An interesting turn of phrase. Perhaps a Freudian slip revealing a rather inflated sense of ownership. Finch, now apoplectic with rage, jabbed a finger towards her. "Get her out. Get her out now. I will not tolerate this insubordination, this intrusion. She is disrupting my guests, undermining my authority." As he ranted, the main entrance doors of the Azure Palace opened again, and this time, it was not an unassuming woman in travel clothes who entered, but a formidable delegation. Alara Vance, Imani's chief of staff, looking every inch the coolly efficient executive, led the way, flanked by Marcus Thorne, the head of internal audit, his expression grim and purposeful, and two sharp-suited individuals from Serenescape's legal counsel. They moved with a quiet, coordinated precision that immediately silenced Finch's tirade. He stared at them, his mouth agape, a dawning sense of dread beginning to replace his fury. These were not tourists. These were not easily dismissed underlings. These people radiated an aura of serious, high-level corporate power. Alara Vance stepped forward, holding a sleek, official-looking tablet. "Mr. Alastair Finch?" she asked, her voice crisp and professional, cutting through the stunned silence of the lobby. "I am Alara Vance, Chief of Staff to Ms. Imani Adebayo, the Chief Executive Officer and majority shareholder of Serenescape's Hospitality, the parent company and sole owner of this property, the Azure Palace." She paused, letting her words hang in the air like a death sentence. "And Ms. Adebayo," Alara continued, gesturing gracefully towards Imani, who stood watching Finch with an unreadable expression, "is right here." The color drained from Alastair Finch's face. He looked as if he had been struck by a physical blow. His eyes darted wildly from Alara Vance to Imani, then back again, his mind struggling to comprehend the impossible, cataclysmic reality that had just been unveiled. The woman he had sneered at, humiliated, and ordered thrown out of his hotel was his boss. His ultimate boss. Tiffany and Chad, behind a reception desk, looked as if they might faint. The entire lobby, filled with a scattering of stunned guests and frozen staff members, was utterly silent, save for the distant, almost mocking chime of a grandfather clock in the corridor. The hunter, so confident in his dominance, had just realized he was trapped, with no escape, in the meticulously laid snare of the very prey he had so contemptuously underestimated. The 7 minutes were rapidly ticking towards their explosive conclusion. The silence in the grand lobby of the Azure Palace was so profound it felt as if time itself had stopped. Alastair Finch stared at Imani Adebayo, his face a grotesque tableau of disbelief, dawning horror, and the sudden, sickening understanding of his own monumental, career-ending blunder. The trespasser, the unsuitable woman he had so arrogantly dismissed, was the ultimate authority, the unseen power he had unknowingly, and with such spectacular foolishness, provoked. Tiffany and Chad, the reception clerks, looked like statues carved from ice, their earlier smirks frozen into masks of pure terror. Other staff members who had witnessed the morning's incident, and perhaps snickered along, now shifted uneasily, avoiding eye contact, a collective wave of dread washing over them. Imani Adebayo finally broke the silence, her voice calm, measured, but carrying an undeniable authority that resonated through the suddenly cavernous space. "Mr. Finch," she said, her gaze unwavering, This morning, you and certain members of your staff provided me with a most illuminating demonstration of the guest experience here at the Azure Palace. An experience that was, to put it mildly, profoundly disappointing and a flagrant violation of every core principle upon which Serenescape's hospitality was founded. She paused, letting her words sink in, each one a precisely aimed dart. My grandfather, the founder of this company, believed that true luxury is not about exclusivity or arrogance, but about genuine warmth, impeccable service offered with dignity, and a profound respect for every individual who walks through our doors. What I witnessed here today, Mr. Finch, was the antithesis of that vision. It was a culture of snobbery, of discrimination, and of breathtaking incompetence, all masquerading as high standards. Finch opened his mouth, then closed it again, no words forthcoming. His usual glibness, his practiced deflections, were useless against the cold, hard reality of a situation. Imani then turned her attention to the terrified clerks. Tiffany, Chad, she said, her voice still quiet but now tinged with an unmistakable edge of steel. Your conduct this morning was not only unprofessional, it was offensive. You judged a guest based on her appearance. You made assumptions based on prejudice. And you treated her with a level of dismissiveness that has no place in this organization or indeed in any establishment that claims to offer hospitality. She looked from one to the other, their faces now ashen. Your employment with the Azure Palace and with any Serenescape's property is terminated, effective immediately. Please gather your personal belongings. Ms. Vance's team will escort you from the premises. Tiffany let out a small, choked sob. Chad simply stared, his earlier arrogance completely deflated. The two security guards who had advanced on Imani earlier now stood frozen, looking utterly bewildered and deeply regretting their earlier zeal. Imani then turned back to Alistair Finch. Her voice, if possible, grew even colder, more precise. Mr. Finch, your failings are far more profound. You have not only fostered a toxic and discriminatory culture within this flagship property, but you have also, through gross mismanagement, questionable financial practices, and a clear disregard for the ethical standards of Serenescape's hospitality, actively damaged this company's reputation and its bottom line. The preliminary audit conducted by Mr. Thorne here, she gestured to Marcus Thorne, who nodded grimly, has already uncovered significant irregularities that warrant a full forensic investigation, which will commence immediately. Finch swayed slightly, his face now a sickly gray. My team and I, Imani continued, have spent the past several hours reviewing your operational performance, your financial stewardship, and a deeply concerning pattern of guest complaints you systematically ignored or suppressed. The evidence of your unsuitability to lead this property, or indeed any property within the Serenescape's portfolio, is overwhelming and irrefutable. She took a small, almost imperceptible breath. Therefore, Mr. Alistair Finch, pursuant to Article 12, Section C of your employment contract, which outlines termination for cause due to gross negligence and actions detrimental to the company's interests and reputation, your employment with Serenescape's hospitality is terminated, effective immediately. Your access to all company systems has already been revoked. Ms. Vance and our legal counsel will provide you with the details of your departure. I suggest you cooperate fully. The words, delivered with such calm, surgical precision, were devastating. The king of the Azure Palace had been dethroned, not in a protracted boardroom battle, but in a swift, public, and utterly humiliating coup executed in under 7 minutes from the moment Imani had re-entered his lobby. The remaining staff, witnessing this extraordinary scene, were a mixture of stunned awe and dawning, almost fearful, respect. The quiet woman they had all underestimated had just demonstrated, in the most dramatic way possible, that true power needed no bluster, no theatrics, only an unwavering resolve and the undeniable authority of ownership. The Azure Palace and Serenescape's hospitality would never be the same. The immediate aftermath of Alistair Finch's public dethronement was a scene of controlled, almost surreal, efficiency. while Finch himself seemed to have aged 20 years in 7 minutes, slumping into a nearby velvet armchair as if his legs could no longer support him. Imani Adebayo's team moved with practiced precision. Alara Vance calmly directed the now-former receptionists, Tiffany and Chad, to a discreet side office where HR specialists were waiting to process their immediate terminations and arrange for their departure. There were no raised voices, no arguments, just the quiet, inexorable machinery of corporate consequence. Marcus Thorne and a member of the legal team approached Finch, presenting him with a sheaf of documents outlining the terms of his dismissal and the impending forensic audit of his tenure. Finch, looking utterly broken, simply nodded numbly, his earlier arrogance replaced by a vacant stare. The two security guards who had earlier tried to remove Imani now stood awkwardly by the entrance, their faces a mixture of embarrassment and apprehension, clearly wondering if their own jobs were secure. Imani addressed them directly, her voice firm but not unkind. Your actions this morning were based on the instructions of your then superior. However, I trust that in future, you will exercise greater discretion and remember that every individual who enters these doors deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of their appearance or perceived status. Consider this a learning opportunity. You may return to your posts. The guards, visibly relieved, mumbled their thanks and practically scurried away. Imani then turned her attention to the remaining lobby staff, bellhops, concierges, junior managers, who had witnessed the entire drama unfold with wide, disbelieving eyes. They were now looking at her with a mixture of fear and dawning, almost reverent, respect. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice carrying easily across the suddenly hushed space. "My name is Imani Adebayo, and, as you have just witnessed, I am the CEO of Serenescapes Hospitality. There will be significant changes at the Azure Palace starting today. Changes designed to restore this hotel to the standards of excellence, inclusivity, and genuine hospitality that are the hallmarks of our brand." She paused, her gaze sweeping over them. "I understand that many of you have been working under a challenging leadership style, a style that, I can assure you, is not representative of Serenescape's values. Over the coming days and weeks, my team and I will be conducting a thorough review of all operations and personnel. We are looking for talent, for dedication, for individuals who understand that true luxury is about service from the heart, not about snobbery or exclusion." She then introduced a distinguished, calm-faced woman who had entered with her team, someone who had been observing quietly from the periphery. "This is Ms. Eleanor Vance, no relation to Alara, a highly experienced hotelier from our Geneva property, who will be assuming the role of interim general manager of the Azure Palace, effective immediately. She will be working closely with me to implement the necessary changes and to ensure a smooth transition. I expect you all to give her your full cooperation." The message was clear. The old regime was gone. A new era, based on competence, respect, and Imani Adebayo's unwavering vision, had begun. The ripples of this extraordinary event would spread far beyond the marble lobby of the Azure Palace. News of Finch's spectacular downfall, and the manner of it, will become a cautionary tale in the hospitality industry, a stark reminder of the perils of arrogance and the often underestimated power of those who operate with quiet integrity. For Imani, this was not a moment of personal triumph, but a necessary act of stewardship. She had reclaimed her grandfather's legacy from the clutches of incompetence and prejudice. The Azure Palace, under her direct guidance, would be rebuilt, not just its finances and operations, but its very soul. It would become a true Serenescape, a place where every guest and every employee felt seen, valued, and genuinely welcomed. This 7 minutes had indeed changed everything, proving that sometimes the most profound revolutions begin not with a shout, but with the quiet, determined actions of a leader who refuses to compromise on their principles. The days and weeks following Imani Adebayo's dramatic intervention at the Azure Palace were a period of intense but focused transformation. Under the calm and experienced guidance of the interim general manager, Ms. Eleanor Vance, and with Imani herself making frequent, unannounced visits to oversee the process, the hotel began to shed the toxic skin of Alastair Finch's regime. The forensic audit conducted by Marcus Thorne's team unearthed a veritable hornet's nest of financial irregularities, cronyism in vendor contracts, and extravagant personal spending by Finch, all masked by layers of obfuscation and bullying of junior accounting staff. The evidence was so compelling that Serenescape's legal team initiated proceedings to recoup significant sums from Finch, further tarnishing his already ruined reputation. More importantly, however, was the cultural overhaul. Imani and Ms. Vance implemented a comprehensive retraining program for all remaining staff, focusing on the core Serenescape's values of inclusive hospitality, unconscious bias awareness, and genuine guest engagement. Role-playing scenarios, often based on the very types of interactions Imani herself had experienced, became powerful teaching tools. Staff members who demonstrated a genuine commitment to these new standards, regardless of their previous standing under Finch, were recognized and rewarded. Those who resisted, who clung to the old ways of snobbery and selective service, were quietly but firmly managed out. The change was palpable. The oppressive, judgmental atmosphere in the lobby was replaced by one of genuine warmth and attentiveness. Staff members, freed from Finch's tyrannical oversight, began to smile more, to engage with guests more authentically. The exclusive and discerning criteria that Finch had so prized were replaced by a simple, powerful mantra. Every guest is a VIP. Guest feedback, once suppressed or ignored, was now actively solicited and meticulously analyzed. Imani herself often reviewed the daily comment cards and online reviews, looking for patterns, for opportunities to improve, for instances where the Serenescape's promise of exceptional, inclusive service might have faltered. She made it clear that excellence was an ongoing journey, not a destination. The Azure Palace, once a symbol of exclusionary elitism, began to attract a more diverse and vibrant clientele. Word spread that the hotel had undergone a profound transformation, that it was now a place where genuine hospitality, not just superficial luxury, was the order of the day. Bookings increased, not just from the traditional old money crowd, but from a new generation of travelers, entrepreneurs, artists, and families from all walks of life who valued authenticity and respect. The hotel's revenue, which had been stagnating under Finch despite his creative accounting, began a steady, sustainable climb. Imani also took a personal interest in identifying and nurturing talent from within the existing staff. She remembered the 2 security guards who had initially confronted her, and, after ensuring they had fully embraced the new training and service philosophy, she made a point of commending them on their subsequent professionalism, a small gesture that had a hugely positive impact on their morale and that of their colleagues. She discovered that one of the junior concierges, a young man from minority background whom Finch had consistently overlooked for promotion despite his exceptional local knowledge and multilingual skills, was a hidden gem. Imani personally mentored him, and within 6 months, he was promoted to head concierge, his passion and expertise transforming that department into one of the hotel's standout features. The story of the CEO who was kicked out of her own hotel and then fired everyone became something of an urban legend in Montclair City and eventually in wider hospitality circles. Some versions were exaggerated, of course, but the core truth resonated. A quiet, unassuming leader had, through decisive action and unwavering commitment to her principles, overthrown a corrupt and discriminatory regime and rebuilt an institution based on integrity and respect. Alastair Finch faded into well-deserved obscurity, his name a byword for arrogant incompetence. Tiffany and Chad, the receptionists, reportedly found work in less glamorous and certainly less judgmental retail positions, hopefully having learned a valuable, if painful, lesson. Imani Adebayo, however, never saw it as a personal victory over them. For her, it was always about the bigger picture, the health of her company, the legacy of her grandfather, and the fundamental human right to be treated with dignity. She had wielded her power not for retribution, but for reformation. And in doing so, She had not only saved a hotel, but had also reaffirmed the enduring strength of values-driven leadership. The Azure Palace, under its new, enlightened management, was no longer just a beautiful building. It had found its soul. The transformation of the Azure Palace under Imani Adebayo's direct and indirect stewardship became a case study in ethical leadership and corporate turnaround. It wasn't just about changing policies. It was about changing hearts and minds, about instilling a deep, abiding respect for diversity and inclusivity at every level of the organization. The 7 minutes that had seen Alastair Finch's reign crumble became a legendary, almost mythical, moment within Serenescape's hospitality, a stark reminder of the swift and decisive consequences of betraying the company's core values. But for Imani, the real work, the more meaningful work, was in the quiet, day-to-day building of a better culture. She continued her practice of incognito visits, not just to the Azure Palace, but to all Serenescape's properties worldwide, ensuring that the lessons learned in Montclair City were being universally applied. She championed initiatives that promoted diversity in hiring and leadership, that celebrated cultural exchange, and that ensured every Serenescape's hotel was a welcoming sanctuary for all travelers. Her grandfather's simple creed, "Hospitality knows no color, no creed, no artificial distinction," was no longer just a plaque on the wall of the corporate headquarters. It was a living, breathing reality throughout the organization. The Azure Palace itself became a beacon of this new philosophy. It won numerous awards, not just for its luxury and service, but for its inclusive employment practices and its genuine commitment to community engagement. Ms. Eleanor Vance, the interim GM, eventually took on a broader regional role, having successfully mentored a new, locally hired general manager who fully embodied the Serenescape spirit. Imani Adebayo remained the quiet power behind the throne, the strategic visionary who preferred substance over spectacle. She never sought personal accolades for the turnaround of the Azure Palace, always deflecting praise to her team and to the dedicated employees who had embraced the change. Her satisfaction came not from public recognition, but from seeing her grandfather's legacy honored, from witnessing the positive impact of her company on the lives of its employees and guests, and from knowing that she had, in her own quiet way, made a difference. She knew that the battle against prejudice and arrogance was never truly won, that it required constant vigilance, unwavering commitment, and the courage to act decisively when core principles were threatened. But she also knew that change was possible, that even the most entrenched cultures could be transformed, and that true leadership was ultimately about service. Service to a vision, service to values, and service to humanity. As the narrator of this story, watching from afar, one can't help but be inspired by such tales of quiet strength and principled action. Whether you're in a boardroom in New York, a classroom in Nairobi, or a community center in rural Australia, the message resonates. Underestimation can be a powerful catalyst, and true authority stems not from a title or a loud voice, but from integrity, competence, and the courage to stand up for what is right. Imani Adebayo didn't just fire a few bad apples. She replanted an entire orchard, cultivating a harvest of respect, inclusivity, and genuine human connection. What are your thoughts on this story? Have you ever witnessed a leader so effectively challenge and change a toxic environment? We encourage you to share your experiences and tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. These stories of everyday heroism and vindication remind us that each of us has the power to make a difference. If you found this narrative compelling, please subscribe to our channel for more stories that celebrate the triumph of integrity over arrogance and the quiet power of those who dare to lead with their values. Until next time, remember that the most lasting legacies are often built not on foundations of stone and steel, but on the bedrock of human dignity.